get some of our kind of maintenance out of the way about who we are at the Center for Women's Entrepreneurship. So Mitra, if you want to go ahead with the slides, we'll get started. And we are recording this. We'll be sending a follow-up email with the PowerPoint presentation and a link to this recording, just so you know, you can rewatch it. I know, especially with some of this webinars, that is packed full of information. It's always good to be able to go back and rewatch. And I'll probably state this again, but just as we're going along, you can open the chat feature. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can ask them as we go along or at the end is appropriate. But we wanted to talk a little bit about the Center for Women's Entrepreneurship and what we do at the center. I wanted to introduce our staff. We have Ann Flynn Schlicht, who is the director of the Center for Women's Entrepreneurship. We have Kate Davis Booker, who is joining us online today as well, who is our program manager and business advisor. My name is Michelle Price, and I am the community and membership engagement coordinator. So if you have any questions about membership, you can shoot me an email. We also have Mitra Saidi, who is behind the scenes operating the technology today. And we also have two amazing graduate students, Azine Tarani and Jenna Hartman. We are celebrating 15 years of supporting women-owned businesses. And throughout these 15 years, we've been able to add a multitude of training programs and webinars like these, things having to do with networking and mentoring and free technical assistance, which we're also going to be talking about. Next slide. We could not do it without our many sponsors. So we always like to make sure that we thank them when we do these webinars. We are funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration, which makes a lot of these events possible. As also, in conjunction with many foundations. We have the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, the BNY Mellon, the Hillman Family Foundation, the Pittsburgh Foundation, the PNC Foundation, as well as the S. Kent Rockwell Foundation. We also have our diamond sponsors, which we would like to thank, which is PNC Bank and UPMC Health Plan. We have our gold sponsor is Bridgeway Capital. We have silver sponsors, which include the Musanegi Financial Group, the URA and Meyer Unkovic and Scott. We have bronze sponsors. We have the Enterprise Bank, Herbine and Company, as well as Community Bank and the WBE Collaborative. Our media sponsors are Pittsburgh Magazine and the Pittsburgh Business Times, as well as WESA. We do want to call out our friends of the WBE Collaborative. This is a group of women-owned businesses who have come together to offer technical assistance support as well as financial support. So we want to definitely call out them and thank them as well. We also want to mention the Ascent, which is a platform that has been created by the Small Business Administration, and it is really cool. I went on and checked it out. It has a ton of resources in their interactive digital platform. We do recommend that you, Mitra will be sending a link to this as well in the follow-up email, that you check it out. It's a really great resource. As we said, over our 15 years, we have been developing a bunch of different programs. One of our most popular is Concept to Launch. We'll be doing another one of those. It's a 6-week program for women looking to launch their own businesses, and it gives you all of the important things that you need to know before you do that. And then we also have people who have grown their business and they're looking to take it to the next level with programs such as Roadmap to 1 million and beyond. We have so many different upcoming events going on, which we'll be talking about after our presentation today. One of our training programs is we have a membership, of which, like I said, I'm in charge of, so you want to know anything else about it, but one of the many perks that is it's the member of the month. And this month it is Karen Kendall, who's been a member of ours for a little bit, and she is the founder and owner of East End Tech Concierge. It's a technology troubleshooting and training company. And what a year to be in tech with all the Zoom meetings that we go on. But she works with small residents, small businesses, and nonprofits to help them navigate the ever-changing world of technology. And we'll be sending out information on hers as well. But thank you to Karen Kendall, who is our main member of the month. We are still doing our COVID-19 small business resources page. We're keeping that up to date. If you go on to our website, you will see that yellow banner that says COVID-19. And we have been organizing all of the most up-to-date resources by topic on our website. So you can kind of go on for your self-help if you want to click through these of what's out there available to help small businesses. It's a great resource that's on our website. We are still doing our free telephone and online counseling hours. You can do it by the telephone or through Zoom if you prefer to look at someone when you're talking to them. We're doing it with all of this recovery. Our amazing business counselors have been keeping up to date, and they can kind of help you navigate and maybe even give you some options of things that you didn't know were available out there based on what you need and where you are. So definitely check that out. We're still doing those kinds of things. As well as we still have women that are looking to open new businesses or need help getting back on their feet with just some of the resources and technical assistance. So we want to make sure that you know that one of the things that sets our Women's Business Center apart from others is we can help you with experts in the fields of business management, digital marketing, accounting, legal, human resources, branding and marketing, diversity certifications, as well as building blocks for business capital. So definitely go on and take that out. You can make appointments to meet with specific technical assistance as well. So we do not want to take up any more time from Jacquelyn Jordan Core, who is going to be our expert today at the Lynch Law Group. I went on and took a look at her profile on their website, and she is definitely more than qualified to be giving this presentation. So I will not spend any more time. I will turn it over to you, Jacquelyn, and let you get started.
Great, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here with everybody today. As Michelle mentioned, please feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat box as we go along. And Michelle has graciously agreed to jump in and ask your questions as we go along, or if she feels that some are appropriate, she may hold some for the end. But we certainly do want to make this interactive, at least through that chat box, and get your questions answered. This is a two-part series, as you know. Today we're talking about steps in buying a business. Next week, same time, we're going to talk about steps in selling a business. And you'll get a follow-up email after this webinar to tell you more about that as well, and to remind you about that. But really what we're trying to do here is provide you with a high-level overview. And if you really have a personal situation and you want to dig deep, one of the things I'm happy to do is spend a half hour with you all, just complimentary time, talking one-on-one with you about your individual situation. Because there may be a question that comes up for you as we go along where you think, I'd really like to ask this question, but it might not be a question that would be appropriate for everybody. Feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn or through our website, and I'm happy to schedule a time with you one-on-one to address any real individual issues that you might have. And let's see here, there we go. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about our firm as we go along. As Michelle mentioned, I'm with the Lynch Law Group. We are a full service but boutique business firm. We are really blessed to have received a number of awards recently. We've been a Pittsburgh Best Places to Work. We've been a Fast 50 fast growing company. And then our individual lawyers have been blessed with a lot of accolades from national organizations. And so we really focus on serving family owned and privately held businesses. And we do provide a full service firm. So if you have other needs, we do have people that do family law and other aspects of law as well. But what we're really focusing on is serving small business owners. And my personal practice is a practice that centers around corporate or business law. I co-chair our firm's corporate practice group. And about 70% of the time that I spend practicing law is spent helping people either buy or sell businesses. So what we're going to talk about today and what we're going to talk about next week, as Michelle mentioned, is what I do every day. I think it's important to tell you all that I also spent 4.5 years as a CEO. So I actually have operational experience as well. And so you'll hear some things today where I talk about pros and cons of buying a business versus starting a business from scratch. And those are things that lean on some of the experience I have from being a C-suite leader as well. I also have a PhD in economic development. So I have studied a lot business growth and economic development within communities. And so I have a pretty deep understanding of markets that I think will help us today as well. So if you're thinking about starting a business, some of you on the call may not yet have started a business. Some of you may have started a business already and are considering buying a business to grow, to add on to your current business. And so this will be relevant to you, whether you are starting a business as a brand new business owner. Maybe you have an idea, maybe you have a business you're looking at that you'd like to find a specific business or buy a specific business, or you're already running a business and thinking about maybe acquiring another business to make your business grow or to make it bigger. This is going to be relevant to you either way. But I wanted to say a word when we got started here about the analysis of starting a business by buying versus starting a business from scratch. So there are really two fundamental ways that people can start a business. And one is that you start from scratch. You go to a lawyer, you decide what your corporate structure is going to be, whether you're going to have an LLC. Most people have an LLC, a limited liability company. Some people elect to have a corporation if they have a startup that they want to try to grow to get somebody to buy it in the future. But you start your company, you get your corporate documents in place, you find a place to rent if you need one, or maybe you operate out of your house, you decide how you're going to market your services or your product, and you truly start from scratch. And that is one way to start a business. But another way to start a business is to find a business that is like the one you would like to have and to buy it and then make it your own, transition it and make it your own. And there are some real advantages to doing that. So what are the advantages of buying as opposed to starting from scratch? Well, first of all, if you buy a business and it's a business that's closely aligned with what you want to do, that business has some existing customers on which you can lean. So you already have a customer base, which is a wonderful advantage. Second, you already have systems in place. And this is a really important one. And here we're talking even about things like you've got probably a copy machine and you have phones already in the building, and you might have an employee handbook in place from the person you're purchasing the business from. And you may want to tweak those things. You may want to make sure that you make them your own to make sure that they are compliant, but you have a structure in place already, and you're not walking into a vacant room that you have rented and trying to figure out where's everything go, what all do I need? Sometimes you can't even anticipate everything you need. And if someone has been buying or has been running a business already, that person already knows what is required to run that business. And so that's a real advantage, that knowing what is needed. And then the last one listed here is no build out. So often if you are not going to operate from your home, or if you've been operating from your home and you're going to go and get a space, you have to do what's called a build out. You have to build that space to meet your needs. You may need a reception desk. Depending on what your business needs, you may need individual rooms built into that space. And that involves construction and rewiring things. And that can be very expensive very quickly. And it also can be difficult to commit to do that in a leased space. So you might be spending money of your own to modify a leased space that you're only going to be in for a specific period of time. And so those are some of the advantages to buying. If you buy, the space is already built out, and it might not be perfect for you, but it will have everything you need to run the business. We sometimes say that you'd be better off to buy a business that doesn't have anything to do with your business in some ways than to start your own. And these are the reasons why. That there's already a structure in place that you can lean on. People that start a business from scratch sometimes do feel a little overwhelmed, because they don't realize everything that's going to be required to get that business up and running. And quite frankly, it's really easy to just not know what you don't know. And even somebody with great business experience, if I were to start a business, there would be things that I needed that I certainly couldn't anticipate. And so buying a business, it eliminates that. So starting a business by buying versus starting from scratch then has some very different points to it. Disadvantages of buying are that you pick up existing liabilities potentially. And this is something, if you do buy a business, you want to make sure that you shield yourself from any legal liabilities that the prior business owner may have. And that can be done in your deal when you actually buy the business. The other thing is there may be bad publicity. You may be buying from somebody who had an employee that didn't get along with the customers. There might be bad Google reviews out there for the company, and you'll have to deal with those things. And then the other thing that you have is a loss of customization. If you build it from scratch, you really get to make it exactly what you want it to be. And if you buy a business, you can tweak it, but you probably aren't going to completely overhaul it the first day that you make that business. So you lose a little bit of the ability to customize that business. So let's talk a little bit about what the steps are in the process of buying a business. The first thing you, of course, have to do is to find a business. And we're going to talk about all these steps, but finding a business can be difficult. And we'll talk about how you can do that on your own and also how you can get some help. You have to determine price, how much you're willing to pay. And along with this determining price goes figuring out financing. So some people have cash that they can spend on a business, maybe from a prior business they had, or from inheritance or money that they've saved. Some people need to borrow. There are different kinds of loans that you can consider. And so that could be something where you would look at what kind of financing you need, and that comes along with price. And then also determining your deal structure, and we'll talk about deal structure.
We did a question that came in real quick that I thought I'd throw in there if you don't mind.
Great, yeah.
Is there a typical amount of time that a business seller stays on or assists after the purchase of the business? And how do you keep them engaged and helping if you need them to?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So there isn't, I would say, a typical time. It does vary largely business to business. Some business owners want to be done when they sell the business. And so one of the things when you are finding a business that you really want to focus on is this the kind of business where you're going to need help? And if so, is the person that you're bringing on somebody who's going to be willing to stay and help you out? And what will their availability be? And you can talk about those things in the negotiation process. Typically, people don't stay longer than a year. I have seen people stay on as a consultant for a longer period of time. People usually stay on for a few weeks in a pretty significant role to help people transition. So often you'll see people work 4 to 6 weeks with the new owner to assist with the transition in nearly a full-time capacity, depending on the business. And then often that person will stay on in a more limited role going forward. Some people, I will say, stay on forever. So depending on what your deal structure looks like, you're talking about deal structure, depending on what your structure looks like, it can actually be the case that somebody stays on and runs the company for you or along with you. And so it is possible for somebody to stay on indefinitely. It's really useful for somebody to stay on longer if you're buying a business in an industry or you're buying a type of business that you don't know much about yet. So sometimes people will say, I am really interested in being a florist, but I don't know anything about flowers. And so they really want to find somebody who will stay on and teach them the business before they exit. And so that's one of those things that you kind of negotiate with the seller as you're finding an appropriate business to buy.
Wow, that's great information. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And jump in anytime, Michelle, with questions like that. It's great to get these answered as we go along. So the next steps would be making an offer. And again, we're going to talk in more detail about all of these. The IOI, or indication of intent, and the LOI, the letter of intent. And these are still relatively informal parts of the process where you start putting the deal that you're negotiating on paper, and then buying the business, turning those, the indication of interest, the IOI, and the letter of intent, the LOI, into definitive documents, into a purchase agreement that you will use to actually buy the business, and then closing your deal and actually getting the keys in your hand. So, how to find a business. There is an online business resource where many businesses are listed. It's the largest resource that is online. I don't advocate it as something I particularly recommend over other sources. I just point it out as the largest online database of available businesses, and that is Biz Buy Sell. And so many businesses get listed there by individuals and by brokers, and that is a place where you can go and look for businesses that might be for sale. There are other online resources as well. Individual brokers will have their own listings. Sometimes it's helpful to just Google businesses for sale in my area, and you'll find a lot of different resources that you can examine and see if they're appropriate for your individual search. You can get personal search help. So you can pay a person or a firm to help you find a business that you're looking for. And we're going to talk about 3 different kinds of search help here in a minute. And then the last is cold calling. What those personal search help people do is they pick up the phone and they call businesses and they ask them if they want to sell. And one of the things many people looking to buy a business don't think about is that they can do that themselves. So if you maybe don't have the funds to engage a broker to help you, or you don't want to pay the fee for a broker, you can cold call businesses yourself. And that is something to really keep in mind, is that you can pick up the phone and you can call a business and you could say, I'm interested in buying a business like yours. Are you interested in selling? And you just need to make sure that you're getting to the business owner before you ask that question. You don't want to be asking that to the person who answers the phone. Sometimes you can throw businesses into a difficult time by not letting them know that you're wanting to potentially sell the business. They don't want to hear that from a potential buyer. So make sure you're talking to the owner there. Michelle, did you have another question?
Yeah, we got another question that came in. It says, do you think Craigslist is still an effective way to find a business to buy? How can you protect yourself from scammers by utilizing that site?
Yeah, so Craigslist is certainly a place to look. Ways that you protect yourself are through a process we're going to talk about called diligence. And so there is a process that we go through to make sure that the business is a legitimate business, to make sure the business isn't in any trouble, to make sure that their financial statements are as they represent them to be. So you can dig into a business that you might find on Craigslist to make sure that it's a legal business and that you're actually getting what you're paying for. There are ways to protect yourself, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the diligence section. That's a great question as well. So yeah, I would say don't forego any individual resource, right? Anywhere where you can find potential businesses, look for potential businesses. Where you look is going to depend a little bit on your business size. So the different kinds of help you can get if you want some help, and these are broken down really by business size, are brokers, M&A advisors, and investment bankers. Sometimes brokers will refer to themselves as Main Street business brokers. And so in the world of M&A, you see M&A advisors, their mergers and acquisitions. In that world, people sometimes talk about different markets for different business size. And the smallest market is called the Main Street market. And Main Street businesses can be up to $1 million a year in revenue. They are generally small businesses. Franchises are often in the Main Street business market. And we didn't really talk earlier about franchises, but one thing I just want to add about getting a franchise is that if you have never been a business owner, a franchise is actually a great way to start being a business owner. It's kind of a business in a box where the franchise has really worked out already what your advertising needs to look like, how your business needs to run, what kind of systems you're going to need to run the business, what kind of reports you're going to need to look at to know if you're profitable. And so for first-time business owners, franchising can actually be a wonderful opportunity to really learn how to run a business and learn the kinds of things that you need to have in place to run a business. M&A advisors usually work in a little bit larger market. Those are people, typically businesses $1 million and up, maybe $1 million to between 10 and 20 million. And investment bankers are working typically with really big businesses. And so sometimes when you're trying to decide what kind of help do I need, somebody might say to you, well, you need an investment banker. And the reality is that most investment bankers don't deal in small businesses. And so if you're looking to purchase a small business, a broker or an M&A advisor is a better choice. And so just some familiarity with these terms can help as you're trying to figure out who do you need to assist you. So if you get someone to assist you, you will get what is called a brokerage contract. And that contract is going to set out the kind of help you're going to receive, how much help you're going to receive, for how long, and what you're going to pay for that help. And so there are two main ways that brokers get paid, either by success fee or monthly. And so you can pay somebody a monthly fee. These fees can be small to very large. So sometimes you can pay as little as $100 a month for help from a broker. And sometimes you can pay thousands of dollars per month for a broker to help you with a monthly payment. And then sometimes there is a success fee. And the success fee means that that broker is going to take a percentage of the cost of the deal. And so if you are a buyer, on top of the cost of the business, you're going to have to pay your broker a percentage of the cost of that business. The low end of that brokerage success fee is typically 5%. And so usually you won't find brokers with a success fee much below 5%, and those can go up to 10 or 12%. So it can be an expensive proposition, but if you're going to have an extended search or think you might have an extended search, sometimes it can be cheaper than monthly fees. So just things to know. Also in this brokerage contract, you're going to have the term of the contract, and that's how long the contract is going to last. You want to know this because the contract may say that you can't change brokers or that you can't buy a business on your own for a specific period of time. And so if you're going to be locked up in this contract, you want to make 100% sure that you understand. So you want to read this contract very, very carefully. You maybe want to get the help of a lawyer. One of the lawyers through the center might be able to help you with this, to look at this contract and really make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. And then you see a reference there to tail periods. And that means that sometimes even after the brokerage contract expires, if you buy a business within the next 6 months or a year after that contract expires, you still have to pay the success fee. So if there's something in there like that, you really want to make sure that you know that you agree to it, that you understand it in advance.
Yeah, and just to clarify, we got a quick question. Would that be 5% of the purchase price?
Yes. Yes. So the success fees are a percentage of the purchase price. So think if you're buying a business and it's a $100,000 business and you have 5%, then you're paying your broker $5,000 on top of that 100,000. You're paying 105,000 total. And whatever your percentage might be, it's a percentage of your purchase price.
Good to know. We just got another question that just popped in. Just to clarify, traditionally, a buyer would not be paying a brokerage fee to a broker who listed a business for sale. Typically, buyers found listings on the market and are listed with brokers do not pay the brokerage fees. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that's correct. So we're not talking here about seller brokers. So there are two different kinds of brokers. Next week, when we talk about selling a business, we will talk about seller brokers and using somebody to help you with selling your business. Here, we're only talking about if you are getting help, if you're getting a buyer broker to help you find a business. And so that is absolutely correct. If the seller has a broker contract, that's completely separate and apart from you. And as a buyer, that's not money you have to pay, and it is not something that you are going to probably deal with. Now, I don't want to get in the weeds on it, but I will say that sometimes there is what's called a buyer's premium on seller's brokerage. And so a seller could have a business listed with a broker where the success fee for the seller is 5%, and there's a 2 or 3% buyer premium. And if you're going to buy that business, you'll be told that in advance. And under those circumstances, which are very uncommon, but it does exist, then you would pay a brokerage fee from the seller's broker. But you'd know that in advance, and you would take that into consideration in determining whether it's a business you want to buy.
Absolutely. I don't know if you're going to be getting into this, but can you talk about the purchase price calculations and earning multiples? Are you going to get into that?
Yeah. So I hate to talk about earning multiples. So, and I don't want to get too technical also, because we're really trying to do a pretty high level overview. I'm happy to talk with people individually more about that, because this is often very business specific. And so sometimes what the question is referring to is that sometimes businesses are priced based on a multiple of EBITDA, which is a calculation that is basically your earnings before a bunch of other things that will be taken out of them, like your taxes, your depreciation, right? And so sometimes they'll look at that adjusted revenue number, and a multiple of it will be how much you pay for the business. And sometimes a very typical multiple is sort of 4%, but it varies by industry. It also varies based on who your buyer is, whether you have a strategic buyer or an operator. Most of the people on the phone are probably operators, but strategic buyers and private equity buyers often pay more. Companies in the tech space sometimes go for a higher multiple. And so it's really highly variable depending on your industry, your business size, who your buyer is. So the difference, we talked about the difference between kinds of help. Let's talk about, going in the wrong direction. Let's see if I can get going in the right direction. Sorry, guys. So let's talk a little bit about vetting the business. So when you are looking to buy a business, one of the things that you'll do is you'll build a team of people, and you will have probably a lawyer to assist you in this process with the transaction. You will also want to get your accountant involved to look at the finances of the business. And that's one of the first things that you'll want to do, is look to see, is the business you're buying a business that's making money? And that's something that your accountant can help you with. And if you have an accountant that can't help you with that, I'm certain the center could give you a referral to an accountant that does that. Not all accountants do it, but you do want to look at the financials of the business. Due diligence is the legal side of that process as well. So there's financial due diligence that an accountant would do. Legal due diligence is what your lawyer would do. And we made reference to this earlier. And so this is really the process where you're looking at, does this company have great minutes? Do they have good corporate governance in place? Are they registered to do business everywhere where they're actually doing business? And then also, what do their contracts look like? Do they have good contracts with their suppliers? Do they have good rates with those suppliers? Are you going to be locked into those contracts if you buy this business? And so those are all things. What's the insurance look like that they have on the business? And therefore, what's the insurance that you might have to have on the business? What about the employees? Do they have employment agreements? How many benefits do you have to pay to the employees? And so these are all things when you're vetting the business. And this usually happens almost after you have, this is very surprising to a lot of people, after you have an agreement to buy the business. You can ask many of these questions in advance, but the legal diligence really happens after you have an agreement in place to purchase. And then there are what are called walk rights. And that means that if you don't like what you see when you go into this deeper vetting, this due diligence of the business, you can walk away. And you can usually do that without any cost other than the cost you've spent at looking at the business. And so most people give it a really good financial look. They decide if it's the kind of business, they talk to the owner, and then they make an offer. They get that letter of intent, the intention to buy the business in place. And then they do this more formal look, this due diligence, to see, okay, what's it look like now? Do I really want to buy it, when we sort of look under the hood of it, right? And also here, you're going to be negotiating the price of the business. And so that's some of what the question was alluding to earlier about the multiples. You're going to be looking at how much money are they making, and based on that, how much money would you be willing to offer them? And that might include things like the debt service, and that's just how much do you have to pay per month. And so you're going to look at how much, if you took a loan out at this price, what would your payment be? And could you make that payment? Michelle, is there another question?
Absolutely. Do I need a NDA typically to go through the diligence process? So an NDA.
Yeah, so most sellers are going to ask you to sign an NDA really early in this process. And so when you go to them and you say, I'm interested in buying your business, you're not going to make them an offer on their business if you can't see their financials, and they're not going to want to share their financials with you without an NDA in place. And so if you're listening and you don't know what an NDA is, it's a non-disclosure agreement. And that document is essentially a document that says the seller can give you information about the business that might even be proprietary information. It might be trade secret information. You might, if you're buying the really famous restaurant, you might get the recipe for the secret sauce while you're in this process. And that agreement says you won't use it if you don't buy the business, and you won't disclose it to anybody in the process except your advisors. And so the NDA typically provides that you can share information with your lawyer, you can share it with your accountant, you can share it with business partners, with the bank, with investors. So it covers everybody you would need to give that information to, but you're not going to publish it in the newspaper. So let me see if I can. So choosing a deal structure. So one of the things you'll have to make a determination if you're going to buy a business is, what's the deal structure look like? And when I say deal structure, there are two different kinds of considerations here. One is, what type of business are you buying? And so if you're buying an LLC versus if you're buying a corporation. If you're buying an LLC and you're buying the whole business, you're getting everything, then in other words, you're going to get that LLC and it's going to be your LLC when you're done, then that is a membership interest sale. And if you have a corporation and you're going to get that corporation when you're done, then that is a stock sale. And so that's one type of deal structure that you have to determine, is what type of entity do you have? But the second question is, are you buying the whole business, or are you buying everything you need to operate the business? And so if you're doing a membership interest sale or a stock sale, you're buying the whole business. You're buying the LLC, you're buying the corporation, you're getting the name of the business. They're handing you everything, including potentially the liabilities that you have to make sure you protect yourself from. Another way to structure your deal is an asset sale. And in an asset sale, you end up getting everything you need to run the business, but you have to form your own LLC or your own corporation. We call that an acquisition entity, in order to buy the business. And so you then would buy the stuff of the business. And it could be the customer list, so it can be intangible stuff. It can be the equipment, the inventory. You might still get the people, but you're not going to get the actual business itself, the LLC or the corporation. This does tend to protect you from liability because the liability stays with the LLC or stays with the corporation, and you take just the assets on. But it also sometimes means that you have to have a different name. Is the name a part of what you're buying in the assets? Sometimes that's important. And so these are all parts of the deal structure. What does this look like? And then also, when we get into talking about how are you going to pay, that's also the deal structure. So, for example, are you just paying cash? And we call this sometimes, here's your money, here's your stuff. Here's your money, here, give me the keys to the business. It's just a cash deal. And that doesn't mean that you have the cash. It could be that the bank has the cash and you're getting a loan and you're giving the bank a down payment, and then they're going to pay the whole amount to the seller of the business, and you're going to get the keys and you're going to get the business. That's still a cash deal. Or are there other parts of the structure? And Michelle asked a question or forwarded a question on earlier about when somebody stays on. Sometimes the compensation for that person staying on is part of the deal. It's part of the structure of the deal. So what will they be paid for giving you that assistance? And so that's part of the equation. So how do you pay? Ways to pay. Well, most people don't. Some people are fortunate and do, but most people do not have all the cash they need to pay for the business. And so usually there's some type of financing involved. It could be bank financing. Often the current owner of the business, the seller, will finance it. And it can be a payment that happens all at once at the closing or payments over time. And so cash at closing is a term that we use to talk about how much money is going to be transferred at the closing. Promissory notes are what gets entered when the owner finances some portion of the sale price. So if the owner says, you can give me $100,000 cash at closing and I'll finance another $100,000, then you get a $100,000 promissory note. And that promissory note is going to say what rate you're going to pay, how much you're going to pay per month, how long, what the term is, if there's an interest rate or if it's interest free. And those are all things that are going to be negotiated with the seller. And it's going to look very similar to your bank contract, how long you pay, what the interest rate is, right? What happens if you default. Those are all things that go into a promissory note. And then there's also earnouts, what are sometimes called revenue kickers. So that means if your business is really successful, you have to pay a little more. And if your business is not as successful, you don't have to pay as much. And this is nice for a buyer sometimes because if you are successful, you don't mind to maybe pay a little more. And those are payments that are made after the closing as well. And the earnout is similar. It's money that gets paid after the closing in payments after the closing, but it isn't necessarily tied to the success of the business. Those revenue payouts and earnouts, one of the great things about it is those can be structured so that if you don't make the money that the seller is promising you are easily going to make when you buy this business, you can structure those payouts so that you don't have to make a payment if you don't make as much as you expect, provided that you're putting out good effort in the business. And then consulting services, that's what I mentioned previously. This is another way to potentially make a payment in the process. So how do you make an offer? We've been talking about how do you find a business, how do you vet a business, how do you make an offer? Well, there are two different ways. The first way often gets skipped, the IOI. This is an indication of interest. It's a really short and simple document that is just something in writing that basically says, I'm interested in buying your business, and here's about how much I would be willing to pay for it. The letter of intent is what gets used more frequently. You can have both an IOI and an LOI, and in larger deals, that often happens. In smaller deals, there's usually just a letter of intent. Sometimes there's no letter of intent, and people go from talking about what the deal is going to be like to drafting the purchase agreement. I will tell you, I don't recommend that. It's better if you can get your negotiations down in writing before you start drafting the purchase agreement. Because while you have the expense of drafting the letter of intent, some people think if I go straight to the purchase agreement, I can avoid the expense of drafting the letter of intent. And that's very true. You can avoid it, but you're just going to have that same expense negotiating when you're doing the purchase agreement, and you're not going to have the terms locked down. So the letter of intent helps you lock down the terms. It is, for the most part, a non-binding agreement. Everybody refers to letters of intent as non-binding. There are parts of it that will always be binding, like the confidentiality. If you don't get to not treat the information confidentially if the deal doesn't go through. Even if you're not going to buy the business, that confidentiality provision remains. And so there are certain things that will be binding in the letter of intent, and those will be set out as binding provisions in the letter of intent. What goes in the letter of intent? The purchase price goes in, exactly what you're buying. So if certain assets of the business are going to be excluded, that will be stated clearly in the letter of intent. The terms of payment, consulting agreements or employment agreements if people are staying on, and then some lawyer negotiation over the terms of what will be and what won't be in the purchase agreement. If you can get those agreements in place and locked down earlier, it always helps to have a letter of intent if you can get a favorable letter of intent. I think it always helps. Also, I'm prejudiced, I'm a lawyer, I know, to have a lawyer involved to help you with the LOI, because they can help you negotiate terms in that letter of intent that you might not even know you need. And there might be things that are very specific to the M&A world, to buying and selling, things like called a basket and a cap, which relate to how much you might have to pay back if certain things happen. You wouldn't even potentially know that you needed to negotiate those things, but a lawyer can help you protect yourself early in the process with that LOI. And so getting that LOI signed means you definitely think you're going to buy the business. It always contains lock rights, which allow you to leave if the due diligence process we talked about earlier isn't what you expect to be. There's also usually a financing contingency in it that says you don't have to buy the business if you can't get the financing. And that's also important, because at the point where you're signing the letter of intent, you haven't gone to the bank yet, you haven't given them the financials for the business, and you probably haven't gotten a full loan commitment. And so it's important to preserve to yourself the right to get out of this if you need to. And that's another thing that happens in the LOI. So then once your LOI is signed, you move on to crafting your definitive and your ancillary documents. Lots of big terms here. This basically is the purchase agreement and the exhibits that get attached to it. We already talked a little bit about the promissory note. The security agreement is something that sometimes gets aligned with a promissory note. This has to do with whether there is a guarantee that you will pay. So sometimes if the seller is giving you a promissory note, they will ask you to give them some security in case you don't pay. That security could be in the assets of the business. Sometimes people will ask for a personal guarantee, and that means that they have potentially in the future rights against your house, rights against your personal assets. Don't let that completely scare you. If you're successful and you can pay your promissory note, then it's never going to be an issue. The more important thing, if you are going to make a personal guarantee, is that you know and understand what you're agreeing to and that you're comfortable with it. It isn't always a bad thing. It's just important that you can balance that risk for yourself and make a really informed decision.
Yes, and I just realized I was muted. So we got another question that came in. Why would you ever not opt for an asset purchase versus a stock purchase?
So this is complicated, but one of the main reasons is because people who are business owners, one, they don't want to do an asset purchase. They often want to sell the whole business because they want to get rid of the liabilities. And also this gets into the taxation benefits. So if you are a seller and you are doing a stock purchase or stock sale on the sell side, if you're doing a stock sale or a membership interest sale, it can impact whether you have to pay capital gains tax. And so sometimes it might not be whether you want to do that, it would be whether the seller was willing to do it as an asset purchase. As a buyer, there are lots of advantages to an asset purchase. We talked about the protection from liability, but the other is being able to depreciate the assets. And so if you buy the assets of the business, you also buy the right to depreciate those assets. Buyers typically like asset purchases. Sellers typically like stock sales or stock purchases or membership interest sales or purchases. And so sometimes we will actually negotiate an increased purchase price to get you what you want. So if they want a stock sale and you want an asset sale because it's an equipment heavy business, or there are a lot of assets you want to be able to depreciate, we will ask them to actually go to their accountant and find out how much their capital gains tax will be. And then we'll compare that to your potential depreciation to see, is there some way that we can bridge this gap and get you the kind of deal you want?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. These are great questions. I love it. So we're moving on now to talk about the closing. So closing day is an exciting day. It means you definitely are buying this business and you're about to get the keys, about to get the assets, whatever the case might be, and you're about to be a business owner. And so what happens and when does it happen? Let's actually talk about when it happens first, because there are two different ways to close a deal. So the most common way and the most cost-effective way, and I can't stress that enough, you will decrease your legal fees and all your other fees by doing what is called a simultaneous sign and close. And that means the day you sign your purchase agreement, you close the transaction. So you sign the purchase agreement, you pay for the business, you get what you're buying, and the transaction is declared closed all on the same day. A simultaneous sign and close, the most cost-effective way to do it. The other way you can do it is called an asynchronous sign and close. And that means that you're signing the agreement weeks, or in some instances, even months before the closing. What that means is that there are additional things that have to happen between the signing of the agreement and the closing. You have to look at additional financial statements as a buyer. You want to make sure nothing's changed. You have to almost do a little bit of re-diligence to make sure that what you agreed when you signed the agreement is still a good deal as of the closing. This is less of an issue if it's asynchronous, but the signing and closing are close in time. And there are some instances where you would have to do an asynchronous sign and close. And an example is if you're trying to get consent from the Small Business Administration to allow you to close a deal where there's a PPP loan, one of the COVID relief loans that's still outstanding. They will demand to see the purchase agreement to give you consent to close. And so you'll have to do that as an asynchronous sign and close. And so there are some times. What happens at the closing? Money is wired. Or a certified check is brought and handed over, but it's paid and you become a business owner. And that's the fundamental of the closing. Other considerations to just keep in mind is that you're going to have work to do after the closing. This is particularly true if you're buying a business that you're integrating into an existing business, because you're going to have two of everything. You're going to have two payroll systems. You're going to have two sets of employees. You're going to have two sets of letterhead and two sets of advertising and maybe two locations even. And there'll be integration that needs to happen. And then other considerations are if you're a current business owner or even if you're buying, there are two different ways to grow your business. One is organically through growing your sales and expanding your network, expanding your territory. And then the other is growth through acquisition. And so you can grow your business by buying a competing business, by buying a business in another geography. That's another way to grow your business. So something just to kind of keep in the back of your head. Oh, Oh, I hate when I start going in the wrong direction. Let's see if we can get going in the right direction again. Well, we'll go all the way back to the beginning and then we'll come back. So as we go through this, we're about to wrap up. I'll just remind you all of that offer that I made about the 30-minute consultation. I'm happy to talk with any of you individually. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My email is here on this slide. And I'm certainly willing to talk about individual situations or to answer other questions that you may have or even may think about after we get off the call today. And I'm happy to do that at no charge to you. So please feel free to reach out. This has been a great interactive presentation. I love how you guys have asked questions throughout. And Michelle, thanks to you for facilitating those questions for us and asking those as we go along. Do we have any additional questions?
We don't. If anyone wants to real quick drop it in, we can maybe ask her one more question. I think that it worked pretty well that people were asking it while you were talking about that subject, and then we kind of had them sequenced in there. So if anyone goes back and rewatches this recording, I think it'll make sense to the questions that you were talking about and how we answered them. And Kate Booker says, so much great information. Thank you. It was a lot of really great information. A lot to think about.
Thank you so much, Kate. That's wonderful of you to say. I hope it was useful for everyone. You know, this is a lot of information to unpack in 1 hour. And so we did move quickly, and it is a really high level overview. You know, I'd be happy to talk in more detail about any of these comments with, or, you know, questions that we talked about, or any of these specific topics with anybody who might be interested.
And I think especially you just brought up things to think about that maybe people never thought about before. We did, someone said, where can we review the presentation? Mitra's actually going to be sending out a link to the recording probably later today with a copy of the PowerPoint as well. So you can rewatch any sections that you'd like to revisit. So we'll be sending that out.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thanks for your great questions. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we do want to quickly go up some other great upcoming events. I will also mention that if you registered for this webinar, you have automatically been registered for the next one in the series on selling your business as well. So you'll be looking for that when that comes up. But we do have some other upcoming events. We've been doing a lot reaching out to the food industries that have been really hit very hard. Our next one is on May 12th. That is nutrition labeling information and insights. So that one's going to be a really great one as well. And then coming up on May 14th, our well-known live Women Business Leaders Breakfasts. We're still doing them at home, which makes it a lot easier to catch at 8 o'clock in the morning. They're always an amazing women who are talking. We have the next one on Friday, May 14th. Which is throw down a rope. It's the topic, why women must help other women succeed. I think this one's going to be a really great one. And our speaker is Heather Bainbridge Cox, who is the CEO and president of Wingdings Incorporated. And then coming up again, the Lynch Law Group, Jacquelyn will be back and she'll be talking about steps in selling a business, but put that one on your calendar. That one's on May 17th. And then we have coming up our Saturday event that we're doing a Build Your Business. We've done one of these online before, and I think we've really kind of perfected it. It's an abridged version as to what we usually do in person, but it's been working out really well. And this is going to be 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And talking about everything, all those building blocks that you need to have in place before you launch your business. So this will be a great one. And then coming up in June, and yes, I said June 8th is the Summer Business Planning Boot Camp, where we've got some boot camps coming up. Again, I think this will be a really nice, interesting way to do it, that we're doing it from 9:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. That you're going to definitely want to look and see what we've got going on with this abridged version of this event. And then we have Pandemic Pivot Speaker Series, again with the food industry, food trucks as a post-pandemic business model shift. And who doesn't love a good food truck? So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers of Revival Chili and the Blue Sparrow food truck. And that's coming up on June 8th. And then on June 17th, we're working with Craft at Chatham University, where we're doing a food startup success program. So if you are thinking about launching a food product business, it kind of goes in line with what we were talking about today. It's starting your own business, but this is going to be food specific. So this will be a good one on June 17th to July 29th. So it's going to be several weeks that you can sign up for to take a look at it. And then coming up, we have another summer business planning boot camp. If you can't make the first one, this one's going to be on June 22nd. You can take a look and see which ones fit into your calendar and sign up from there. And then I think we've got webinar, how to create, I like this title, how to create champagne communication on a beer budget. So this will be a really interesting webinar talking about how to get your communications with your customers up and running. And I think that's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. I think that we covered a lot of information. And like I said, look for the email coming from Mitra with the follow-up information and a link to this recording. So thank you again, Jacquelyn. We really appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much. Hope to see you all next week.
All right. Take care.